Hello, welcome to this GWLAD event for Creative Cymru. My name is Kiri Pritchard McLean and I am lucky enough to be chairing this discussion. So basically, this is a chat about COVID. It has been happening, guys. I don't know if you've seen it on the news. And how it's been impacting creative people. Now, the two important bits of admin to get out of the way first, which I've written on a piece of paper, otherwise I will forget, are there is an interpretation option. So if someone is answering in Welsh and you would prefer to hear it in English, if you go to the bottom, there's a little tab there that says interpretation, and if you select English on that, it will come through, it will basically switch when someone's answering in Welsh, so you can hear it in English. And also there's a live QA event element to this event, which means that you can ask questions. So if you go down to the bottom of your tab on Zoom, there's a QA thing that you can just click and you can ask a question there, and we will get through as many of them as we can as and when they appear, and you can ask those in English or Welsh, whichever one you're more comfortable in. So yes, as I said, I'm Kiri Pritchard McLean. I'm the chair. I'm a stand-up comedian and writer, based formerly in Manchester, now on Ynys Môn. Yes, and that's it. I'll be here chairing, which I think is I just keep ask the questions and keep in charge of the time. So I think our panel are going to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Mair. If you tell everyone who you are, and this is so exciting. It's like Family Fortunes. And tell us what your name is and what you do and where you're from.
Yes, so my name is Mair. Mair Beard. I live in Cardiff. I'm from Aberystwyth originally, and I'm an actor and writer.
She's been all bashful there. She's like literally BAFTA nominated. She's amazing. And this is also exciting. I can say all this bit now. But this is everyone that I wanted to be doing this as well. So there's no duds. Everyone's absolutely brilliant. And then Eädyth, let's go to you.
Hi, I'm Eädyth. I'm a producer and singer. I'm living in Aberfan in Merthyr in the Valleys. And I'm also a sound designer. So I do a lot of music related stuff.
I love that you've gone really legit and you're like, I'm just going to go in the room with all this sound equipment on the wall so you know that I'm free.
Of course.
Gwennan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to check if the Welsh translation is working. Is that right? So Gwennan Mair.
So I'm Gwennan Mair. I'm originally from Blaenau Ffestiniog in North Wales. I now live in Rhuthun and I work at Theatr Clwyd in Mold as the Director of Creative Engagement, but I'm also a facilitator and I create work with the community. Those are the main things I do.
Oh, diolch. And Henry?
I'm Henry Widdicombe. I am originally from Cornwall, but came here to study and stayed. I've never left. And I run Little Wonder. We're based out of the Brecon Beacons and we run comedy festivals in Wales. We run tour shows for comedians, including Kiri. We make TV and radio programmes, and we try and influence comedy in the UK from Wales, basically.
Great. This is going to be so good. I'm really excited because everyone is massively overqualified. So obviously the COVID-19 pandemic hit everyone incredibly hard. There's not a single person on this call who hasn't been impacted by it, I think personally and financially. So we're just going to work through some questions if that's all right. So we'll start with the people who are mainly focused towards performance first. How did you adapt? Did you adapt? Were you able to adapt and continue working during this period? Should we start with you, Eädyth?
Yeah, I think, it started off difficult because it was kind of like everything was up in the air. How were we meant to understand what was going on around us? There were so many mixed messages, in the news, adapting to how different people were, and then and being unsure about how to approach people in general in person. So obviously things went completely, online. We have to kind of start learning how to adapt in this kind of new world, in this new way, and doing music is kind of, I guess, in my sense, it's been quite easy because I've been able to really focus entirely on building my name online, which is kind of really good for me because, being a musician, it's good to have everything online, as well as having the live performance element in person. And I think in terms of mental health, not being able to, you know, perform live and have those experiences, being around audiences, you know, I think that's kind of where I get the most of my confidence, and where I learn to interact with others and get to know people. Interacting in person is a really important thing. A nath o mynd yn really galed pryd nath lockdown digwydd. Achos...
It got much harder once lockdown started because it was uncertain in terms of whether we were allowed to meet with people and whether we could communicate face to face, and then changing from doing it in person to making that effort to get in touch with people and socializing. And then it all went online, that kind of communication. So it's been really difficult adapting to that. But there are really positive things that have come out of the lockdown in terms of learning how to get to know people far more than I did. I've had to do that since lockdown and COVID. So it's a huge learning curve in terms of how I've really got to know people, how I've adapted and I've got in touch with people on a personal level. I've been able to show my personality much more because we've had to
interact with people in the right way online, to really show yourself in the right way. And it's been really interesting to kind of learn how to do that, you know, because it's just a completely different world, online and in person. It's just so different. But yeah, it's been really a busy time for me, and a busy kind of like few months of like learning and adapting and changing the way that I do my music as well, and trying to be more interactive online, which is yeah, really good life lesson. Ond yeah, dwi wedi bod yn really brysur yn trio creu mwy, I trio bod yn mwy creadigol. Dwi'n meddwl mae hynna'n...
Yes, I've been very busy trying to be more creative, to try to inspire myself. I'm really lucky to be surrounded by nature. I can go out every day for a walk to see the natural world and to have that escape from that live experience before lockdown started.
On how this has kind of gone. But it's been so good to kind of take the time and really focus on myself and build something off that, build more inspirations and more friendships and more connections with people, you know, from the lockdown and from having to do it all online. So yeah.
Right. And what about you, Mary?
Well, as an actor, I think that we are quite good at adapting anyway. We go through months of the year, you know, without any work at all, and you do have the in-between jobs. What's been difficult this time round is the in-between jobs that most actors, people I know anyway, do, is going into office, being temps, or, you know, waitressing or something like that, that we haven't been able to do. So I personally was very lucky. A friend of mine gave me a sewing machine, and I started making face masks and different sort of things out of fabric to try and sell. Luckily, that actually sustained me for quite a long time during lockdown. Sales have plummeted now, now that there's a vaccine. But as a perspective of a writer as well, I've found it incredibly difficult to sit down and write something, mainly because I've been stuck inside for so long. I haven't seen anyone. It gets to a point where you have to really sort of take care of your mental health. And if sitting in front of a blank screen where nothing is coming to you is you know, not good for you, then you have to walk away from it. I don't know how many times I've heard people telling me that William Shakespeare wrote King Lear in a pandemic. Which also doesn't help. So there is an element of pressure, I think, on creative people, especially performers, that if you're not able to do what you do, you have to find something else. You have to do something else. And like I say, I think that actors are pretty good at adapting and pretty good at being able to support themselves in between. It's just been even more difficult, I think.
Yeah. And Gwennan, what about you?
Yeah, I guess to bring to this conversation, I work a lot with young people and people that are absolutely, you know, love the arts and are so loyal to us at Theatr Clwyd, and to, you know, not have any creative experiences for our young people and the nation of creatives in Wales. You know, what is there, what has there been for people in terms of live theatre, and of course there hasn't been anything. So trying to adapt way of engaging with new audiences and new people has been really tough, and not trying to jump on the bandwagon of creating loads of digital stuff, and, you know, trying to create meaningful relationships and new partnerships, and actually starting to see what is the purpose of venues as well. Like, is it, in these kind of scenarios, is it actually about creating civic centres where it's not about the art that we make and it's about how we help the community, but then, you know, we don't want to lose our kind of identities either as places that create art. So yeah, it's been quite tough. I think there's also something really important about how we all need to help each other and support each other, and there's something really beautiful in terms of the freelance kind of crew that I think we've become a lot more closer, if that makes sense, between venues and freelancers. A lot more conversations, a lot more kind of coming together from my experience. And like Eädyth said about mental health and kind of talking about this, because it doesn't feel like it's going away very quick, if that makes sense either. Like, creative blocks are really, you know, a thing, and how we support each other through this kind of turf into the future, I think, is going to be really, really key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From, I think, your perspective as someone who works with performers, how have you seen people who've managed to successfully transition, or has it been everyone's been hit the same roadblocks?
Well, I think it's really interesting with comedy in that comedians, well, I mean, I know everyone lost their means to make money overnight, but comedians would gig 5 times a night. They're kind of unique in that, 5 times a week. So they're kind of unique in that way that each week they'll be doing 5-6 gigs, and that is their salary. So whereas the online gigs have been successful, like especially yours, COVID Arms, has been a roaring success, and it's a lifeline though. So these things are not a replacement for gigging 5-6 times a week, but they are a ray of sunshine, and they are a ray of hope, and they are a lifeline. But they can't replace what a gigging comedian's work is. And so what you're seeing is, I think, like many artists, comedians have a need to create. Well, the best ones will anyway, and so they have been turning to Twitch and have been turning to other online platforms. And what you're finding is, because the bottom fell out of commissioning as well at the same time, so they couldn't act, they couldn't write, so they've had to turn to these other channels, and there are no gatekeepers on these channels. So what you're getting is a really pure form of this person's interpretation of what comedy is. And that's been what's beautiful to see, is these very unhoned and untampered with ideas coming online, and you're seeing that true interpretation of that person. But what you're not seeing, so they could be successful on Twitch, but basically if they're turning to podcasts or Twitch, well, that's a 12 to 24 month investment to build that audience, to build it up. So yes, they're turning to online, but again, it's not a simple answer to the problem that they're finding themselves in. And so I think that's really what we're seeing in comedy, is you're seeing that burst of creativity because it has to happen, because it has to happen in the arts. But where is the support and the money, and not everyone also has the means to get online and all the skills to get online and do these things. And so again, you're seeing not a meritocracy, but a privilege, I guess, of like people's ability to invest in various bits of kit or things like that. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting. And also I believe, like with the online gigs, some of them have been excellent. I think what you've done, especially with COVID Arms, is you've lent towards the sort of community, building a community of people coming together and doing it. So it's less about material and more about everyone getting together and having a laugh and playing games and like doing all these different things. But again, some acts will lend themselves better to those environments than others. And so you're finding comedians that haven't found a home online. And so we need to be aware of all of these different types of artists and how to sort of make sure everyone, or as many of them, get through as possible.
Yeah, totally agree. To talk briefly about the COVID Arms, to bring us on to the next point, which I'm going to talk about the challenges and opportunities that have hit you as performers working in the pandemic in Wales, and if being in Wales has raised any additional opportunities or challenges. Because so COVID Arms, to bring people up to speed who aren't aware of it, is a digital comedy night that we started in the first week of lockdown, and then we ran it every week for the first, whatever it was, 14-15 weeks, and a weekly comedy night. There's music on. Thanks very much for coming and doing it, Eädyth, you're amazing. And then we went monthly after that, which is where we are at the moment. And I would say the biggest challenge there is, well, the reason I'm also in my brother's spare room doing this is the internet in Wales, in rural North Wales, is not particularly reliable. So it's gone at the moment. So the two things I had to do today, this and the thing earlier, I had to go somewhere else, which is not easy to do. You know, I know we're out of a fire break now, but it's still not easy in a pandemic to find somewhere quiet to work that's suitable. So I think that's been a big challenge that I've hit, is it's great to have these digital ideas, but ultimately if you're living in a country without the infrastructure to efficiently do it, you run into all sorts of problems, which means it's a reflection, I think, of the industry in general. You end up moving things to perhaps a country over the border that does have a bit more of the infrastructure around. And so, Gwennan, can I ask you about how the challenges, but also the opportunities that you found during this time, and if any of them have been specific to Wales, perhaps?
Yeah, I guess something that's been really interesting is the north and south kind of coming together a little bit more over this time within the industry. I think, you know, Eädyth touched on it earlier, the fact that meeting other people has become something so much more easy to do, isn't it? And conversations that you'd never ever have normally because nobody has time. You know, we're so fixated in our own little projects or our own little worlds, or, you know, Cardiff being the central place of kind of our industry. I think it's really opened us up. I think it's created a platform for artists and little companies that people didn't know of before, and how we can celebrate work like that together all over Wales is really interesting, I think. I live in rural Wales, in North Wales, where I guess also that kind of thing of accessibility, and you talk about the internet service, but also kind of, you know, technical and technology poverty is also real, I think, and I don't think that's Wales specific. I think that's, you know, the whole of the UK, and how we kind of Henry, you touched on it as well, not create this kind of superiority of the arts becoming it again. Yes, like this, there's been a lot of discussion about shifting what the arts is, and COVID being a time to pause, reflect, and build something new potentially, or, you know, how we can learn from the really, also I think shifting things as well. Yeah.
Great.
Can't hear me very well.
Sorry,
Internet really awful.
I know, it's proving a lovely point though, Gwennan. You just got
it really is.
It got a bit glitchy at the end, but I think we followed everything that you were saying. Eädyth, what about you?
Yeah, so I've been really lucky. Well, you know, I think I lost my job right at the beginning of lockdown, which was a shame. And I think that was the lowest point, just because everything was up in the air. I had no idea what the future would hold, the year, you know. But I was lucky enough to meet this lovely company called Run Amok, who put on a show in Theatr, Riverfront Theatre in Newport. And they asked me to do sound for them, which was an amazing experience. I'd never done sound designing before. And this was like February or March, and I now call myself a sound designer, which is like insane. So like over the lockdown period, I've managed to like, you know, have a whole new hobby and a career just through sound design, just because I've happened to come across a small company who found me online. And I think, yeah, just like when I'm saying, it's the little companies that you find. And I think that is so important. That's kind of one of the really important like points that have come out of this, is the fact that, you know, you can find your kind of people and your you know, new friendships that you really fit into, that you may not have had before, and which is something that I definitely went through, you know, living in, you know, Merthyr in the valleys, where I don't necessarily have the group of friends that I would like really get along with or really feel like I fit into. Finding people online has been like a really, yeah, different experience. You know, I didn't think that would happen during this period at all. And then, yeah, things have piggybacked off that. You know, I then went on to do sound design for them again on another online production, which was so interesting. And then now I'm doing these Sherman, you know, theatre projects online, all online play readings, which are just like, it's just so cool, and it's like totally my thing, and all the people who are involved, like, they really get my music, and I feel like I've built some really solid friendships out of these experiences, which is just an incredible thing for me, and I can only be grateful for those experiences. But yeah, just like I was saying earlier, it was more so the adapting and doing that, going through that change and having to try and adapt to that change, I think was the most like hard thing. And then having to like find out how to like do new stuff, you know, around technology, and like trying to learn how to mix really quickly so I could get stuff out, you know, learning more about sound, you know, so I could perform, you know, doing live streams and stuff, which I think I didn't have the means to kind of learn how to do that. So I had to try and just do it all on my own. But yeah, again, you know, so many new things have popped up gradually over the lockdown period, where things have been more accessible. There's more training programs and people that are willing to help out with those things, which is just, yeah, it's just great. So it has really brought a lot of people together in that sense, and it's definitely helped me kind of build new friendships, which is amazing.
It's great. I mean, it sounds like you've had a great lockdown, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I have. I've just been stuck in my studio doing music all the time, which obviously can be quite harsh on the eyes. But yeah, it's been so fun to like experience all of these new things.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What about you, Mary?
My lockdown hasn't been as yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, because I think that talking about the difficulties that we're experiencing, theatres in Wales are not open at the minute, the last I checked. Cinemas and casinos and all sorts of places can be, but theatres aren't. And I feel like it's part of an inherent attitude towards theatre and a lot of the arts, that it's something that really doesn't matter, or it's something that is seen as a luxury, whereas it's my profession, obviously. Hello. And I don't know, I don't understand why it's happening. It can happen in England and in Scotland, why it can't happen in Wales. Having a room full of people watching a screen, is okay, but having a room full of people with one person on stage, that can't happen. And that is a big difficulty, especially for my future employers, theatres, who are not getting funded for this and who are not getting the money that they need in. Christmas time is one of the most important times for theatres, for pantos, for Christmas shows. That's where most theatres get their money. So it's a bit of a worrying time, I think, because I think that theatres will have had a hard year, and I think a lot of performers will have had a hard year. And I'm very lucky. I'm one of the people that have been able to find another source of income over lockdown. But for the people who can't, I fear that we're going to see a lot of people giving up being performers, which is incredibly sad. And it was something that you touched upon, Henry, as well. It's that we'll be seeing the same people over and over again, the same type of people, privileged people who can afford to do this, to have this living. And I think that's a question that we really need to ask, and it's something that really needs to be looked at. And the ways of funding that,
Yeah, it's an element that we have in comedy where the circuit is a bit more of a meritocracy. When it comes to kind of industry, the fringe and television and radio, that becomes massively biased towards middle and upper class people. And you're so right, it's exactly the same in comedy. The people who are being forced to give up now are the people who aren't from wealthy families. And so it's just we're gonna lose I think it seems like it's the same in most people's sphere, that we're worried about losing this very important voice that is already quite fragile in our industries. Henry, what about you as someone who's running things from the other side?
Yeah, so I think to start, I think touching on what Gwennan said, of like, as a company, we've spent 10 years isolating ourselves from the comedy industry and basically building a wall down the border of Wales and saying, we're over here doing this and you're over there doing that. And almost felt naive when this happened, that all of our industry just vanished. And it was like, oh yeah, of course this could happen. I hadn't ever considered that could happen. And then suddenly it was a case of companies that some other small businesses that you felt were perhaps competition. You were like, oh, wouldn't it be horrible if that company didn't make it through and that company didn't make it through? And straight away, I think there was a coming together of a lot of the small indies and say, we're what makes this industry interesting and vibrant, and sort of let's see how we can get through this together. And the other thing that happened in comedy is we just realized very quickly that we didn't have a voice. Theatre has long established bodies and other arts to represent to government, and comedy just had never had that. And because really comedy's only been around properly since the 80s. I mean, some people might, that's arguable, but like, and so it's still a very young audience, a very, very young art form, really. And so yeah, so the Live Comedy Association was set up, and we ended up on that as the Welsh representative, but also as a company ourselves, we pivoted to essentially becoming a lobbying organisation in Wales, because we suddenly realised that we didn't sit under Creative Wales, we didn't sit under the Arts Council. And so whilst we've been having creative discussions before a crisis of like, oh, where do we sit, and can we come here, can we come, suddenly it was we needed to sit somewhere very quickly. And I think what became apparent, not just in Wales, but in the UK, is the lack of understanding of the arts and how it is made up of this big web of individuals, rather than large companies with huge payrolls that you can just go, oh, furlough, there you go, bang. And so again, outside of a crisis, it was kind of okay that they didn't understand what this was, because it all sort of worked and we'd all figured out how to function within it. But then that lack of understanding straight away was just so apparent, of all these people that didn't fit any of the schemes. And so I feel like what's been good about Wales is that slightly smaller pool, is that we've had a bigger voice to be in rooms with these people, explaining who's missing out, where that money needs to go. And I know it's been incredibly stressful for so many artists, so many freelancers, but if you look what's happened in Wales compared to England, it is actually a lot better. And so it's still been scary and frustrating and really hard time for all of us, but it is actually better, and the money is being targeted slightly better. And so Wales, I think, just by its size really, and the fact that you can understand what the arts looks like in Wales in a much easier way than you can in England, has had the ability to hopefully come through this. Say we do get a vaccine and we're coming out sort of next summer, we should come through with a lot of our means of production intact. So those freelancers can suddenly, hopefully, we can keep hold of as many of these, because we're seeing small businesses doing fire sales of all their kit and things like that. So as a festival, if we get through it and then we say, right, time to go, and none of our suppliers have survived, we don't have a festival. And that was that sort of lack of understanding of like, oh, if we save the festival, then it's okay. But no, it's not. You need comedians, you need freelancers, you need suppliers. And it was that was missing at the start. And I think it's way more understood now by Welsh government. And I applaud them for it, essentially. I think they have been good at listening and trying to understand it.
Yeah, I agree. Something I noticed is that, well, in particular you, Henry, that when it was just everything got whipped away, like I basically had a tour that you guys had put together, so it was going to take care of the next few months right into the Fringe in August, and then also an extension that was my year, and that all got taken away. And it wasn't Sky or Comedy Central or any of those people who give me work the rest of the year who turned around and went, what can we do? It was indies like yourself that turned around and were basically all hands on deck. What can we do to help? It was all the small companies kind of coming together, and especially you being so responsive in Wales. And it seems like it's a similar situation with you, Eädyth, that it was the theatre was it in Newport that was like right and giving you work directly, which is I guess a positive thing to come out of it, is that we're not a huge country, and there's not millions and millions of creatives, so it's hopefully drawn everything closer together, like you were saying, Gwennan, as well of linking the north and the south is a potential positive. What do you think, so long term now, what do you think that your industry, our industry, needs to prioritise to make sure that, you know, we bounce back? And also an element I'd like to consider is, if something like this happens again, what can we put in place? And that's something I'm thinking about all the time. Is there anything that we need to at the moment we're fighting fires, but is there something that we can lay down for a much stronger, more robust creative scene in Wales in the future? Henry, can I start with you?
Yeah, so I think obviously what this has done for all of us is given us a chance to breathe. I think in your career you are on a treadmill. Like we were doing festivals year after year of like, as soon as you've done one, well, even before you've done the one, you're thinking about the next. And actually the one benefit has been, that chance to go, what's wrong here, and look at your industry. And I think one of the big wake-up calls for me is how you cannot make a living from comedy in Wales. Like we can as a business, but as what we're seeing is a brain drain, essentially, of like our up and coming talent have to choose to leave if they want to make it. They have to go to London. They have to go to Edinburgh Festival, which costs upwards of 10k to do that. And that's not once, that's 10 times in a row. And so you're losing voices, and you're losing interesting voices, and voices that perhaps don't look commercially viable initially, but actually are. Because what you'll find with a lot of the most alternate voices, which actually Wales is very good at turning out, is the industry will take about 5 years to shape around them. So for about 5 to 6 years, they'll feel completely alien and like they don't have a home. And that's what Little Wonders always try to do, is capture those talents and those voices early and say, well, you've got a home with us, and until you're seen by these other people as having a value, we will value you. And so, but I think comedy in Wales has come great deal in the last 10, great distance in the last 10 years. And it's just, it made me realize, okay, we've come this far. What now do we need to put in place to make sure that you might still have to leave for the next 5 years, but maybe you'll leave a bit later and maybe you'll come back a bit sooner. And so we need to be creating more gigs, more of a local scene in Wales, in towns. So outside of the cities, it needs to be spread across. And these gigs can have, like, we wouldn't set a quota, but they should be leaning on the Welsh talent. There should be, we've talked about it, like a Welsh tour of like each year, new artists going around all the venues and making it a big thing, you know, that this is a regular thing that happens, and then it goes up to Edinburgh and we're supporting these new voices. And it's things like, so what tends to happen with comedy is a lot of them go into the Radio 4, which you have, sort of the BBC. So you go down to London, you come into those creative programs with the BBC, and you end up writing on topical shows, creative writing, radio news quiz, things like that. And it's great. I mean, it gives you so much knowledge in how to craft a joke, how to know what an audience would like in terms of radio and broadcast. But we can be doing that here. We need to be working harder with Writers Room Wales, who are fantastic, and BBC, and even other broadcasters within Wales. It doesn't just have to be about BBC, to grab these voices and give them opportunities earlier, and take chances with comedy. Comedy is seen as a risk when in fact it really shouldn't be. We should be finding these late night slots to experiment and to bring through these voices and give them these opportunities, because that's how we'll grab onto this talent and nurture it for longer, and also make them feel like they should come back here and should feed back into Wales, you know, rather than go, well, Wales didn't want me, so I'm off, you know. And that's what I feel about what we need to do going forward in comedy, is just go all in with the opportunities we can give these artists.
Great. And what about you, Mary?
I think that an important thing going forward is, well, we've lost a lot of audiences due to theatres being closed. I think an important thing is, how do we get those back? So it's not rather a point, it's a question. How do we do that? How do we engage? You know, a lot of theatres have put a lot of digital content online, which is absolutely fantastic. Most of it's been free. The difficulty with that is that people will expect things to come for free. As a performer, that doesn't work for me. Exposure is great, but it doesn't pay the rent. So I think it's an important question going forward, is what do we do about that, and how do we get the audiences back? And I think that's the most important thing in terms of the theatre, certainly, and venues as well. How do we get those audience back in the room, you know?
I think I've certainly seen in comedy, I don't know if this is the same in theatre, when with things kind of opening and then not, and some things being all right to be outdoor, I think there's a lack of confidence in audiences in even booking anything because they think it's going to disappear. Is that similar?
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I've said it before as well, like Christmas time is the most important time for theatres. It's Christmas shows, it's all of that. So when a lot of people go to the theatre at all, is to go and see a pantomime at Christmas. It's seen as a tradition, but those people haven't gone this year. Will they come back again? And it's important for theatres and the whole industry as a whole to like try and nurture those audiences and give them a reason to come back as well, you know, make some new exciting work.
Eädyth, what about from your perspective as a musician?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Henry was saying. It's kind of, you know, very similar in terms of music side of things. I think, you know, the funding side of it is the most important thing. I've been trying to apply for as much funding opportunities that I can, just so I've got, you know, I can start making projects that help others. I was recently involved in a project which I did with Laser Rage, and I think, you know, trying to help people by mentoring and giving training opportunities to learn new skills, whether that's tech or, you know, producing or writing skills. I think that's like definitely tech. I think that's something that a lot of people have been in the music side of things have been trying to kind of better themselves with, just because everything's now tech and like online. So I think, you know, just being able to make those kind of just having more mentoring and workshops and things to help people build you know, off their careers. I think that's been really helpful. I've been really lucky to be a part of Forte project, which has helped you know, mental health side and music side by giving like gigs and like online kind of training workshops and stuff, and also mindfulness sessions and things like that, which has been really good. So I think like taking a more holistic approach is also really helpful. But yeah, I think pushing online gigs is really good as well. You know, the comedy nights that you did, including musical artists, is like a really amazing thing, and giving opportunities to upcoming artists in Wales. And I think connecting with other parts of the Celtic nations and trying to kind of broaden our horizons by like connecting with Scotland and Ireland and trying to kind of integrate more and becoming more of a Celtic nation, you know, especially with what's going on in the government. And I think, you know, I'm very Yes Cymru, pro Yes Cymru, so you know, I'm really going for independence for Wales. And I really think, you know, that's going to help us massively moving forward. That's just my opinion, obviously, but yeah.
Great. Gwennan, what about you?
I'm back, I think. Is my internet a lot better?
It's so much better.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
amazing.
Really
Dumar,
good
sorry.
call. We've all noticed how good the door is behind you, so well done for getting it.
Yeah, a couple of things really. I'm
going to switch to Welsh, if that's okay. Mari, you touched on the audiences and how important it is that we engender their confidence in coming back to theatres, but also the work that's been happening at the grassroots level, where people see theatres as their second homes. If their home perhaps isn't the safest place for them, you'll go to your drama club or your dance group to be able to escape from the daily reality of your life. And I think that the emphasis in terms of how we create that activity that, again, is face-to-face, that live element where people can express themselves, can talk about their feelings and learn new skills, all of that is vital. And it's not just the performance side, but the side of it where I feel, working at Theatr Clwyd, that it's a privilege, because we do have that technical side of theatre in the theatre itself. So the costume design, the set design, stage managers, those skills that are being lost at the moment and have been lost over the years, they're not at the forefront of what one thinks about when one talks about working in the arts. So how, again, do we raise that awareness and that desire and empower people to genuinely see the arts as something that they can reach and be part of? And I think that hearing the stories of people we don't usually hear from, in terms of their portrayal on our stages, all of that's so important. And as many people have said this evening, it's those voices that will be lost first, because there isn't sufficient funding to sustain those voices. So I think, Eädyth, you're entirely right. That funding side of it is crucial. And there are versions of this across the world where artists are given a wage throughout the year. So we are such a small nation. If there's something like that we could establish because of this crisis, so that's a question rather than a comment. But how do we really look to the future so that our artists don't lose confidence if this were to happen again? Yes, that's my point.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting proposition, and what you're saying about the people who don't, or how do I phrase this, the people who aren't traditionally accessing or working within the creative industries, because that was when Henry and I were talking about if we could wave a magic wand and change how comedy was in Wales. Like you said, that everyone was moving over the border to work, and we're massively overrepresented in terms of talent in the BBC and radio and comedy and things, that Welsh talent there, and you basically hit a ceiling in Wales. And why we were talking about this idea of a tour is it's that thing of if you can't see it, you can't be it. I was growing up in rural Wales, I didn't really see much theatre. I certainly never saw any stand-ups. I never saw a Welsh female stand-up. But like, you know, if I'd have been able to go and see one in, you know, Bangor, Menai Bridge, I might have got to this quicker, which, you know, would get you on your path. And so, yeah, just trying to invest in the next generation, trying to recognise in, like Henry says, this breathing time that we have where we can rectify things for the people coming up as well. I've got a few questions here that have come through on the Q&A. So this is from Nikki. She says, how have your digital experiences been during this time of restriction due to COVID-19? And how do you see the role of digital in your work in the future? So just very quickly, for me as a stand-up comedian, the COVID Arms was just sort of a mad experiment that's taken off. But what it's allowed me to see is that firstly, there was loads of huge comedy fans who always wanted to watch live comedy, but for whatever reasons, and that can be finance, it can be childcare, a lot of the time it's accessibility in terms of just wheelchair access into venues, or, you know, having social anxiety disorder. It means that they can engage in live comedy in a way that they want to engage. Also internationally, I'm lucky enough, I've got a podcast, which means you automatically have an international audience, but I cannot afford to go to America or Australia or Canada, but they can watch the COVID Arms every month, or, you know, a show that I put up online. So from my perspective, digital's, I've always been aware of it, but I've really sort of enjoyed it, learning how to maximise my interaction with it over the lockdown. And now moving forward, I think something Henry and I have spoken about is having a provision for a digital tour date on every tour, if touring comes back in the near future, is to not turn our back on the audience as well, that has now swooped in and helped us and, you know, paid our mortgages. And a lot of these people, like I say, are diehard comedy fans who, you know, have wanted to engage and haven't been able to not just go, oh, see you, we're back to doing live venues now. So that's how I think things will change with me, that it will now automatically be part of my mindset of, okay, and how does digital fit into this tour or this show or whatever we're doing. What about you, Eädyth? Do you see digital being part of your future as well?
Definitely. I think like this is gonna, you know, this is not going to like just stop and go back to normal. This is the new normal now. And, you know, even if we go back to doing gigs live, which will be, you know, amazing when that happens, I still think, you know, having it going on digitally as well is really good, and it's really accessible as well. And like you were saying with social anxiety, I think that element of it is really good. You know, I didn't even know about Zoom before the lockdown, and, you know, it's now the center of what I do. You know, Zoom is my social kind of element of my career now. And although that will obviously come to an end, well, we hope that will come to an end, I still think it's really good to have that and be able to, you know, have gigs and live performances and live streaming on social media. I think because social media is such a big part of everyone's life now, and will be, because we have computers and we have technology, it's constantly upgrading. I think it's kind of the new way of you know, connecting with people from across the world in a different way than what we were before. And I think it's a much more kind of personal, I think, and like we've mentioned throughout, it's building relationships in a much more, I don't know, it's weird because obviously it's technology, but I feel like it's building a more kind of a deeper connection with people, because, you know, we're all sat at home, and we can all see each other, and we're all just like having a conversation and talking with one another. But, you know, we're talking about real problems, real world experiences that have been going on for the past few months, which is you know, it's really comforting, and although it's been an ordeal, it's good to know that other people are experiencing the same experience as you, and I think that kind of gives a really good connection, you know, in a social element, as well as just like connecting with another human being. So yeah, I think it's going to happen, and I think it's a great thing that it can carry on. You know, this kind of whole experience of the arts can continue going on digitally as well as being in person as well.
What about you? Is that your thinking as well, Gwennan? And I'm thinking about how it would relate to the outreach as well that you do in communities, whether that's applicable.
Yeah, it's very interesting you said that, actually. We did an open mic night for all of our community groups on Zoom. This was in the first lockdown. Kind of over 300 people joined that. We reached out to about 1,000 people each week through Zoom workshops, through our music services and our creative engagement team. And a beautiful moment happened where one of my participants, his grandparents lived in India, and could actually access him performing for the first time ever. So, you know, they'd never ever been able to kind of watch him perform in school, or like, you know, those little assessments or Christmas shows or anything. And it was a moment in my kind of shift where I went, oh my God, we've missed a trick for years here, where there can be like a mix of, you know, both practices coming together. Saying that, I think there's something so incredible about the pure live as well, and how we don't lose that thing of bringing people that don't know each other into a space to share something. And you know, it is about having the balance, and hopefully one day we can still do that, you know, that we can go into an auditorium or a village hall or whatever, and I don't know, have a rave or whatever. But like it's so important, isn't it? I think it's like especially for creative people, like having that kind of shared experiences is key to us, I think.
And then Henry, with your, obviously you produce, you know, for telly and radio as well, but in particular, will it affect your live production in terms of Mach and Eädyth? And
I think, yeah, obviously to an extent. I think in the I think Aberystwyth especially, I think the issue with Machynlleth is that it's very much skewed to work in progress and very much skewed to unpolished stones, and that might not lend itself particularly to full streaming, but there we can put elements of that in there. I just think in terms of taking the other sort of route of digitally and from the performer rather than I think it's allowing what I mentioned earlier, is that sort of bypassing of gatekeepers, and you are finding creative people finding ways to play in a new landscape. So comedians especially would need that feedback mechanism from live and of making people laugh. But what you're seeing is creative minds going, okay, how can I play with this format? And it feels so early days that you're going to see innovations, and not innovations in technology, but innovations in people's minds of going, oh, I could do this or I could do that. And that's exciting, I think. And I think what you'll see is, as well as the live and as well as what you were talking about of having a live date, you're going to have shows specific, like Kitson's tour at the moment that was just at Theatr Clwyd, which we attended. It was an empty theatre, and it was built for it was built for digital, and it was wonderful. You know, it didn't need an audience. It didn't need, and I think that's what you're going to see, is that sort of disruption of oh, I do this and I go to Edinburgh with this show, and that there has to be an audience. You're going to see that twin thinking of, I do that, but I can play around over here. And I think it's forced many people into that arena earlier than they expected to go into it, or maybe they never expected to go into it. And it's just opening up creative pathways, I think.
And then Mair, what about you, my love?
Yeah, so on a practical level, I've been able to do self-tapes and have auditions on Zoom, which has been fantastic. It means I don't have to travel, spend a lot of money to go to London and do the auditions. On a personal level, I've really enjoyed being able to watch theatre from my own home. I've also and also the COVID Arms as well, which I'm a big fan. You know, I mean, I think that going forward, it's going to be, like Gwennan was saying, really, it's going to be a balance. I think that the digital the digital inclusion of the things that we do, I think is a fantastic element, but at the same time there is nothing like being in the room and having a shared experience with people.
And I think that as newer artists are gonna, because I think people like us were sort of established through live and then had to quickly learn how to do online and develop your voice online, whereas I think the newer generation will simultaneously develop both voices, which can only be a positive thing because it also has a global outlook to it. And Sophia has got a question here. She says, I understand the importance of venues in sectors like comedy and theatre, but the loss of money and audiences, but as a disabled creator during this pandemic, I realised online events have made everything so much more accessible to me, and I can't imagine going back to a world where creative spaces are often not accessible. Would it be sustainable to monetize online events and spaces? Could we get back to live events but make them available online, brackets for a fee too? I think it's sort of what we've been talking about. It seems like we're all from different disciplines, and I think we all see the creative world moving forward as being inclusive as online. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good. Okay, good. Don't worry, Sophia, we're not banning you from any gigs. What were you saying, Harry?
I think to add to that, I think just to go back to the performance side as well, I think what you will see is the ability for a digital performance to play a part in a live comedy gig. So you might have a stand-up night which has people in person there, but also has the ability to deliver a digital set remotely. And I think Sophia's right. That's never really been thought about. And again, it feels naive to have not thought about that and suddenly go, oh yeah, you could do that. And people will make specific tailor-made sets for that. And it's just a thought of how to incorporate that technology now.
Mm-hmm. And there's some people who are doing really creative things. Like I know Stuart Laws has done a whole set based on sort of Zoom backgrounds. So there's some people who are brilliantly creative and they've learned into it. But what we were doing with the COVID Arms in the most recent months, in fact the one that you did, Eädyth, is we are trying to already take that step into mixing live and digital. So I was there with a very small, socially distanced outdoor audience, and Tudur Owen as well. And then we would flip between that and digital, and it does work. It's a bit, it doesn't take long for an audience digitally and in person to tune into that, which, because it's really what you've been watching on television for years. It's, guys, it's Eurovision, which is all we've ever wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
That's the big takeaway from this panel, is maybe we can be like Eurovision. You've all been so wonderful. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would you'd like to say? Obviously, Mair, you want to push your face mask company.
Hands on Etsy.
Good. Is there anything you feel like that you would like to mention that perhaps haven't before we sign off? No, we did it. We completed it. We completed the Creative Arts. And thank you so much. You've all been so generous and insightful. And what does I think feel nice is it feels that from every different discipline, it feels like we're all on the same page about how things will move forward and what we can do in the long term to make sure that Wales keeps being a brilliant creative voice. Thanks very much, and diolch to everyone who's tuned in. Nos da. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.